What's going on, you guys? It's your boy Ben Mahari here, represent Mahari Nation Sports Podcast. Much love to the entire LDBC and the entire basketball community. I know I haven't been uploading videos as much. Been busy with stuff in my personal life, man. But today I'm here because of what happened, to this great legendary player that you see right here. And since I haven't done a historical perspective video in a while, since my last one was on Karl Malone, I feel like this is the best time to really restart it again, as we're going to just talk about today on the great Elgin Baylor, who unfortunately died 2 days ago. Actually, say 3 days ago. Actually, yeah, it was actually Monday. Yeah, 3 days ago, from natural causes. But this was a guy that was pretty much one of the most underrated, forwards that has ever played in basketball, and a guy that not many people, tend to talk about when you rank them as one among the great players, during the '60s and the early '70s. But he had a very obscured beginning before he really rose into stardom in the NBA. Um, Born in Washington D.C., he began playing basketball when he was 14 years old. And although he grew up near the DC Recreational Basketball Center, during that time, African Americans were banned of using the facilities, and Baylor pretty much had limited access to basketball courts while growing up. So this is the kind of stuff that he was pretty much dealing with at the time. He played his first 2 years of high school at Phelps Vocational High School in 1951 and 1952. But at the time, public schools in DC were still segregated, so he would pretty much only played against other black high school teams. There at that time, he set a scoring record of 44 points against Cartersville High School. During his during his two all city years at Prep, he averaged about 18.5 points per game and 27.5 points per game in those seasons. Unfortunately, he did not perform well academically and pretty much dropped out of school between 1952 and 1953 to work at a furniture store and play basketball at the recreational leagues. But when he returned back to high school ball, he played at the recently opened all black Springham High School. At 6'5" and weighing about 190 pounds, he was pretty much named senior, first team All Washington, All Metropolitan, and the first African American player to name in that team. He won the SSA Livingstone Trophy as the area's best basketball player in 1954, when he averaged about 36 points per game. Okay, then when he got into college, um, he was arranged on a scholarship at the College of at Idaho, where he was supposed to expected to play both basketball and football. But only after one season, when he averaged about 31 points per game, the school dismissed the head basketball coach and restricted the scholarships. A Seattle car dealership interested in Baylor at the time brought him into Seattle University. After setting out 1 year to play at Westside Ford, an AAU circuit at the time, that pretty much Elgin Baylor averaged the same amount of points eventually, you know, before eventually declaring himself eligible for the draft in 1958. But in fact, before he was drafted by the Lakers, the Lakers actually drafted him with the 14th round of the 1956 draft. But Baylor opted to stay in school. And during this 56-57 season, his senior year, he averaged about 29 points per game and 20 rebounds per game. Then in the next season, and then in pretty much this very last season, he averaged 32.5 points per game and leads Seattle University to the NCAA championship game, where it eventually would fall against the Kentucky Wildcats. All right. So in 1958, he was drafted number one overall by the then Minneapolis Lakers, and pretty much was convinced to skip his senior season and join the pro ranks. The team was several years removed from its glory days with George Mikan when they won 5 championships, and now they were experiencing some issues, not just at the gate with attendance, but also with the talent level that they were falling short of. But with that draft pick being said, his superb athletic talent and all around game was pretty much seen as the guy that could pretty much resurrect the entire franchise as the Laker franchise moved to Los Angeles. All right. So as a rookie in 1958, 1959, Baylor finished second in the league in scoring, averaging 24 points per game, third in the league in rebounding with 15 a game, and eighth in assists with 4.1 assists per game. He registered 55 points in a single game, the then third highest mark in league history, behind Joe Fulks 63 and Mike at 61. During that same season, he won Rookie of the Year and led the Lakers past from last place the previous year to the NBA Finals, where they eventually lost to their eventual rival Boston Celtics in a 4-game sweep, eventually kicking off the greatest rivalry in NBA history. During that year, Baylor helped lead the Lakers to 7 more trips to the NBA Finals. So from 1960 all the way to 63, Baylor averaged, get this, 34.8 points per game, 38.3, and 34, respectively. And during that same 60-61 season, all right, Baylor also set a new NBA scoring record when he scored 71 points against the New York Knicks while averaging 25 rebounds per game. So think about this for a moment. This was a guy that pretty much was pretty much ranking what, from 6'5" as a forward. This was a guy that pretty much was a very athletic, small forward who can glide in the air and finish at the rim, but was a very tenacious rebounder. He was very, very much a unique basketball player for his size at the time. Despite only playing 48 games in the 61-62 season, he managed to overscore 1,800 points during that same year. Later that season, in Game 5 against the in Game 5 of the 62 Finals against the Celtics, Baylor grabbed 22 rebounds and still sets the NBA record for most points in an NBA Finals game with 61. That record to this day has never been broken. You know what I'm saying? So for a guy that really relied heavily on his, very athletic ability to glide in midair and pretty much, finish at the rim and, clean up on the offensive and defensive boards, this guy was pretty much a monster, pretty much. But unfortunately, the one thing that you could say impeded more of his, of his game a bit was his knee injuries, and that began back in the 63-64 season. And even though he was still a very powerful force during his prime, unfortunately, he never would average about 30 points and above 30 points a game for the remainder of his career. You know what I'm saying? And unfortunately, his legacy is pretty much going to be remembered for not winning an NBA championship. Although, as we're going to get to that in a minute, there were many times he was very close to winning a championship, especially the 68-69 season. I can tell you this though right now. That 68-69 season was perhaps their best chance of winning a championship. But despite that, even though he never his last year of scoring 30 plus per game was the 63, he averaged 25 points per game in 64, 27 points per game in 65, and only 16 points per game because of injury when he only played 65 games. Then he scored 26.6 in 67, 26 a game in 68, and 24 points per game in 69. So if you really think about it, he was still pretty much a dominant scoring force. You know what I mean? Despite the fact that he had, Jerry West on his side and also had Wilt Chamberlain later on in his career. But he was still a guy that was still dominating, at that side of the floor. But unfortunately, he never was able to live his dream of an NBA championship because he only played two games in 1971 before rupturing his Achilles tendon. And then 9 games into that 71-72 season, the same year that the Lakers with Wilt Chamberlain and Jerry West, when they won 33 straight games in the regular season and went on to win the championship, unfortunately, he only played 9 games because of the same knee injury problems that happened back in 1964. And it's a very, very sad thing because if he would have just been, relatively healthy for the majority of the year, can you imagine if him winning a championship that in that same year? Like I said, this was a team that won a then record 33 straight games. That record has never been broken since. And unfortunately, Will Elgin Baylor was forced to retire and miss out on all that glory and missing out on an NBA championship. That would have been the perfect, signature to his resume because despite all the accomplishments, the individual accomplishments of 11 All-Star appearances, winning the All-Star Game MVP in 1959, first team All-NBA 10 times, a former Rookie of the Year in 1959. All right, he's part of the 35th anniversary team and among the 50th anniversary All-Team, while his number is still retired with the Lakers. Okay, the fact that he never won a championship, unfortunately, is only the missing mark to his legacy. You know what I'm saying? And it's a very sad thing, but there's no doubt about it that he's still one of the greatest undersized power forwards in the league. Where now many guards are now big, are of his size or even bigger. During his playing days, he scored at least 23,149 points, dished out 3,650 assists, and grabbed 11,463 rebounds over 846 games. His signature of the running bank shot, which he was able to release quickly effectively over taller players, allowed him to achieve numerous scoring records, which still stands even today. The 71 points that Baylor scored on November 15th, 1960 was a record at the time, and it was also a team record until Kobe Bryant obviously surpassed that in January 2006 when he scored the 81 points. The 61 points that he scored in Game 5 in the 1962 Finals against the Celtics is still an NBA Finals record, which has yet to be broken. An underrated rebounder, he averaged about 13 and a half rebounds per game throughout his career, and including a remarkable 19.8 rebounds per game during the 60-61 season. A season average exceeded by only 5 other players in NBA history, who all of them were 6'8" or taller. Now, to think about what he accomplished in that role, 13 and a half rebounds per game is an amazing accomplishment for a man of his stature. You know what I mean? And pretty much he was a guy that pretty much relied on his positioning and also his athletic ability to dominate the boards. That is amazing. Okay. So pretty much after his career, came to an end, he was an assistant coach, then later the head coach of the New Orleans Jazz. But unfortunately, he only won 86 of his 86 games throughout his career and immediately retired after the 78-79 season. But then in 1986, he was hired by the LA Clippers as the team's president of basketball operations, and stayed there for at least 22 years until resigning in 2008 at the age of 74. Unfortunately, his time with the Clippers was not well remembered. He only amassed 2 winning seasons and amassed the record of 667 victories to pretty much 1,153 losses. That only include one playoff series during that time. And he only was executive of the year one time in 2006 when they pretty much made the Western Conference semifinals against the Phoenix Suns before losing in Game 7. You know what I'm saying? But he had to pretty much endure the wrath of the racism and bigotry by then owner Dollar Sterling at the time. And when he resigned from this position in October of 2008, the next year in February 2009, Baylor filed an employment discrimination lawsuit against the Clippers, including team owner Donald Sterling and team president Andy Rosener, and the NBA alleged that he was underpaid during his tenure with the team and then was fired because of his age and race. Unfortunately, the lawsuit, was rejected by a Los Angeles State Court on March 30th of 2011 by the unanimous 12-0 vote. Now, I will tell you this. You know, it's a very very sad thing that Elgin Baylor went through a lot of the garbage and the BS that Donald Sterling obviously put him through. I mean, it's no, I mean, the evidence is overwhelmingly clear, but the fact that he stayed 22 years didn't make sense to me because if the team was not performing well, why you didn't resign? Why you didn't resign when things were not going to go well? Especially the fact that you stuck around with an owner that pretty much discriminated against black people and other minorities at the time. You know what I mean? That's just the only thing I had a bit of an issue with. That's just me. But unfortunately, he died, at March 22nd of 2011 at the age of 86 by natural causes. He was survived by his wife, Elaine, his son, Alan, and his daughter, Allison. Now, where I put Elgin Baylor among the NBA, among the Laker greats of all time. Now, they're obviously the all-time great. The players that are way better than Elgin Baylor are obviously, to me, Magic Johnson, Kobe Bryant, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and obviously Jerry West. If I had to choose where I put Elgin Baylor, he would be in the top 5 in my view. You know what I'm saying? But if you ask me where we would be among great forwards in Laker history, between James Worthy and Elgin Baylor, I think those would probably be the 2 best ones you could put in there. You know what I'm saying? Um, Among great players, he's certainly a top 5, and some people might have him as a top 10 greatest Laker. despite the fact that he never won an NBA championship. Now, it's kind of unfair that that people dismiss his legacy because he never won a championship. But let's be real about something here. There was no one man or two men or even three that could have beaten what the Celtics had at that time. Listen, the Celtics had immortal teams with at least 6 to 8 to 10 future Hall of Famers on one team. And the worst part was they even retooled when the first members of the dynasty were getting old, and they still kept on winning. They won 11 NBA championships during that run during Bill Russell's run in 13 years. Okay, and pretty much Elgin Baylor was basically led his team to the finals. Let's see, he's led his team to the finals at least 7 times and never won a championship because of how great the Celtics were during that period of time. So it's kind of unfair that Elgin Baylor doesn't get the credit that he deserves because never winning a championship. Tell that to the other great players in the '60s that failed to beat the Celtics. Guys like for Jerry West until he won his title in '72, and then when Oscar Robertson won his championship in 1971, thanks in large part to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. But to really put that in proper context, for the fact that he was able to score at least 23,000 points during that era is pretty much an unbelievable accomplishment in of itself. And considering the fact that he was undersized at 6'5" as a small forward and amassing over 11,400 plus rebounds throughout his career is amazing in of itself. So I really think that we need to give much more praise to what Elgin Baylor did, during his playing career. No doubt about it. He's still one of the greatest forwards that have ever played in the game, and certainly a guy that we never seen before and probably will never see again. And so, unfortunately for me, I was not even born in the '70s, though. So I mean, in the '60s, obviously. So I would have not seen him play anyway. But watching his reels and how he was able to dominate the game, there's no denying the fact that he's still among one of the great small forwards that's ever played the game. And he needs to be much more respected in among Laker history, despite the fact he never won a championship. So that's just my 2 cents. You let me know what you think in the comment section below. Once again, rest in peace to Elgin Baylor, and my condolences to him and his family. And with that, I'm out. Peace.